The moment Eric Dalton opened his mouth, every single person in that store stopped what they were doing. Not because he was important. Not because he was loud, though he was. They stopped because something about the way he spoke to the woman in the gray coat made the air feel wrong. Like watching someone kick a dog in the middle of a crowded room and then smile about it. I promised my mom to get to 1,000 subscribers before Easter. Please make my dream come true by liking, commenting, subscribing and turn on your notification bell. The woman didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She just stood there holding a small shopping bag, her eyes steady and calm in a way that made her look almost dangerous. Nobody in that store knew her name yet. Nobody knew who she was married to. Nobody knew that in less than 10 minutes, the man doing the mocking would be escorted out of a building his own humiliation had just made famous. But that's the thing about people like Eric Dalton. They never see it coming. They're always too busy performing. This is the story of Lena Carter. And it starts like most great stories do, with a devastating goodbye. 3 years before that afternoon in the mall, Lena Carter stood in the kitchen of a small apartment she shared with Eric and tried to understand what was happening. He had made dinner. His favorite, grilled chicken, roasted potatoes, the kind of simple meal she could put together after a double shift at the hospital where she worked as a billing coordinator. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. She had been awake since 5 in the morning. Eric had come home in his new suit, smelling like expensive cologne and someone else's opinion of him. He sat down at the table, looked at the food and said nothing for a long time. Then he looked at her. I don't think this is working anymore. Lena set down her fork slowly. What isn't working? Us. He leaned back in his chair with the kind of casual ease that told her he had rehearsed this. I've been thinking about where I'm going. My career. The people I'm going to need to be around. And Lena, he paused. Not for emotion. For effect. You don't fit that picture. She stared at him. What picture? The life I'm building. He said it like it was obvious. Like she should have already known. I'm moving up. There are dinners, events, connections. The kind of people I need to impress, they come from money. They think a certain way. And you, he glanced around the small kitchen at the second-hand chairs, the chip tile, the pot she'd bought from a thrift store. You're comfortable with this. I'm not. Lena felt something shift inside her chest. Not break, shift. Like a gear clicking into a different position. She had loved this man. She had worked extra shifts to help pay their rent while he finished his MBA. She had eaten cold leftovers alone on nights he had networking events. She had never once asked him to be anything different. Are you saying, she said quietly, that I'm holding you back? Eric had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. But only slightly. I'm saying we want different things. No, Lena said. Say what you mean, Eric. He met her eyes. You're a good person. But you're not the kind of woman I can build a future with. You're too, he searched for the word. Simple. The word landed like a stone dropped from a great height. Simple. She had worked 2 jobs to put herself through college. She had nursed her sick grandmother 3 weekends out of every month for 2 years. She had loved him, genuinely, without conditions, without performance. And the word he chose was simple. Lena stood up from the table. She didn't throw anything. She didn't scream. She walked to the bedroom, pulled the small suitcase from under the bed, the same one she'd brought from her grandmother's house when she was 19, and she began to pack. Eric stood in the doorway watching her. You don't have to leave tonight. I know, she said. But she left anyway. She walked out of that apartment with her suitcase and her dignity and exactly $43 in her bank account. The night air was cold. She had nowhere specific to go. And somehow that felt like freedom. What Eric never understood about Lena Carter was that she was not fragile. She had grown up poor in a small house with peeling wallpaper and a grandmother who worked 3 jobs and still found time to braid Lena's hair every Sunday morning. She had learned early that the world didn't owe you softness. You found it where you could and you kept moving. So that's what she did. She moved to Millfield, a mid-sized city 4 hours from her hometown, and rented a room from an elderly woman named Mrs. Park who charged her $200 a month and asked no questions. She found work at a medical records company during the day and waitressed at a diner 3 evenings a week. She sent money home to her grandmother every month, sometimes more than she could afford. She ate a lot of peanut butter. She lost weight she hadn't meant to lose. She had nights where she sat on the edge of her rented bed and felt something close to invisible. But she kept going. 14 months after leaving Eric, she was promoted to office manager at the records company. She enrolled in an online accounting course. She started sleeping through the night again. And then on a Tuesday in February, a pipe burst in the office bathroom and flooded 3 rooms. The repair crew arrived within an hour. Leading them, in worn jeans and a plain jacket, looking like just another worker, was a tall, quiet man with dark eyes and careful hands. He assessed the damage without drama. He gave instructions without raising his voice. And when he noticed Lena trying to salvage wet files from a soaked filing cabinet, he walked over without being asked and helped her carry them to higher ground. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. He had a low, calm voice. The kind that didn't need volume to be heard. His name was Daniel Harlow. She didn't know in that moment that Harlow was the name printed on the side of 17 buildings in the city. She didn't know that the repair company he appeared to be supervising was actually a subsidiary of a technology conglomerate his family had built over 3 decades. She didn't know any of that. She just knew he had helped her carry wet files without making her feel like she owed him anything. He came back the next day. Not for the pipes. To bring coffee for the office. He said he felt bad about the disruption. Lena looked at him for a long moment. "You really don't have to do that." "I know," he said again. He smiled this time. She noticed it changed his whole face. They talked for 40 minutes that morning, standing in the hallway while water damage assessors moved around them. He asked her questions that weren't small talk. Not "where are you from" or "what do you do for fun," but things like "what did you want to be when you were a kid" and "what's the last thing that genuinely surprised you." He listened to her answers the way people only listen when they actually care. She thought about him that night. And the night after. And the night after that. He came back again the following week. This time just to see her. They had dinner at a small Italian place she liked because it was cheap and had good bread. He ordered the same thing she did without looking at the menu like he was proving something. He told her about growing up in a house where money was everywhere but warmth was scarce. His father had been a brilliant man, demanding, absent, more devoted to the company than to his family. His mother had left when Daniel was 11. He had learned to be quiet in rooms full of noise. He had learned to trust very few people. "Why are you telling me this?" Lena asked. She wasn't being difficult. She was genuinely curious. Most men waited much longer to say things that honest. Daniel looked at her across the table. "Because I think you'd understand." She did. Over the next year they built something careful and real. Daniel eventually told her about Harlow Enterprises. About the company, the inheritance, the weight of a last name that came with a board of directors and a public profile he mostly avoided. He watched her face when he told her, looking for the shift he'd seen in other women. The calculation, the sudden change in warmth. It never came. "Does it change anything?" he asked. Lena thought about it seriously, which he appreciated. "It explains why you're so careful with people," she said. That's all. He fell in love with her somewhere around that moment. Possibly before. They married quietly 18 months later. A private ceremony with 12 guests in a garden outside the city. No press. No announcement. Lena wore a simple cream dress she had found in a small boutique and cried only once during his vows when he said, "You taught me that strength doesn't announce itself." She knew he was talking about her. She didn't tell him about Eric. Not the details. She said only that her last relationship had ended badly because she hadn't been what someone wanted. Daniel had looked at her steadily and said, "Then he was a fool." And that was the end of it. 2 years into their marriage, Lena's grandmother had a health scare. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to send Lena back to her hometown for a long weekend. She drove herself. She always drove herself when she could. Daniel had offered to send the car and the driver and the whole quiet machinery of their life together. But Lena preferred the 3-hour drive alone with the radio and her thoughts. She spent 2 days with her grandmother, sleeping in her old bedroom, eating food that had been made with too much salt and too much love. Her grandmother looked frail but sharp, the way she'd always been, small and fierce and full of opinions. On her 3rd morning, Lena decided to pick up a gift before heading home. There was a luxury shopping mall on the north side of the city that had been built after she left. She'd heard it had a good jeweler on the 2nd floor and she wanted to find something small but meaningful for her grandmother. A bracelet maybe, or a pendant. She dressed the way she always dressed when she wasn't attending an event. Dark jeans. A gray cashmere coat Daniel had given her that she wore because it was warm, not because it cost what it cost. Simple earrings. Her hair pulled back. A small tote bag over one shoulder. She looked by most accounts ordinary, which was exactly how she preferred it. The mall was large and polished, the kind of place with marble floors and soft lighting and staff in matching uniforms. Lena moved through it comfortably, stopping to look at a window display, checking her phone once for a message from Daniel. "How's your grandmother?" She typed back, feisty as ever. "Coming home tomorrow." His reply came in seconds. "Good. I miss you." She was smiling at her phone when she walked into the jewelry store on the second floor. It was quiet inside. A few other customers browsed the glass cases. A salesperson approached and Lena asked to see their pendant collection, something understated. She was leaning over a case, considering a small gold piece with a delicate engraving when she heard his voice. She recognized it before she turned around. Some voices stay in the memory like a splinter, not painful anymore but still there. Still detectable. "And this is the watch I was telling you about. 11,000. Custom band. Eric Dalton." Louder than she remembered. Broader in the shoulders, in the way of a man who had discovered the gym and decided everyone needed to know about it. He was wearing a fitted blazer and holding his wrist out for the inspection of two younger men in similar jackets. Behind them, a woman in a red dress scrolled her phone with the bored confidence of someone used to being decorative. Lena turned back to the jewelry case. Her pulse had shifted, not racing, just different. Steady but alert. Like a change in weather. She thought about moving to another display. She thought about leaving entirely. She would think later about how differently the afternoon might have gone if she had. But she was looking at the pendant. It was perfect for her grandmother. So she stayed. The salesperson was pulling out a tray for her consideration when she heard the footsteps stop behind her. And then the voice, lower now, sharp with something ugly. "Lena Carter." She turned. Eric was looking at her with an expression she recognized immediately. It was the look of a man who felt powerful and wanted to feel more so. He had always needed an audience. Now he had one. "It is you," he said and smiled. Not warmly. "Wow. I almost didn't recognize you." Lena held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she looked back at the tray of pendants. "Hello, Eric. What are you doing here?" He said it like the mall was his personally. Like her presence required explanation. "Shopping," she said. He laughed. It was a short, performative sound, meant for the people behind him. He took a step closer and she could sense him warming up to something the way a person warms up to a speech they've been saving. "Shopping," he repeated. "Here? In this place?" He gestured broadly at the store with its glass cases and soft lighting. "This place has pieces starting at 3,000, Lena. You sure you're in the right store?" One of the men behind him made a low, amused sound. The woman in the red dress looked up from her phone. Lena did not move. "I'm sure." "Right." Eric tilted his head. He was enjoying himself. She could see it in the looseness of his posture, the brightness in his eyes. "What are you up to these days? Still doing the billing thing? Or did you find another, what was it, waitress job?" The store had gone quietly alert. A few other customers had stopped pretending to browse. "I don't need to catch you up," Lena said quietly. "We're not friends." "No, we're not," Eric said with a small laugh. "You know what, I actually think about you sometimes. Like a reminder. Of what I didn't want." He glanced at the woman in the red dress, his girlfriend clearly, with a look that was both for her benefit and against Lena's. "No offense. But you were always so plain, you know? Like the kind of person who doesn't know what they don't know." The word plain hit the same place in her chest that Simple had 3 years ago. She recognized the feeling. She didn't let it move her face. "Eric," she started. "I'm not trying to be mean," he said in the voice of someone who absolutely was. I look at you right now standing here in that coat and I think, I made the right call. I really did. You want to know how I know?" He tapped the watch on his wrist. "The $11,000 custom one. Because look where I am. Senior VP by 34. Car that costs more than most people's houses. And he gestured at her, at the tote bag, at all of her ordinariness. "Here." Someone nearby actually winced. Eric's colleague laughed. His girlfriend had put her phone away now. She was watching with the focused attention of someone at a live show. And Lena was quiet. Not the quiet of someone who had nothing to say. The quiet of someone deciding whether any of this deserved a single word in response. She looked at Eric Dalton, this man she had once loved, and felt something she had not expected to feel. Pity. Not anger. Not humiliation. Just this clean, almost clinical sadness for a person who needed to do this to a woman in a jewelry store on a Wednesday afternoon. "Are you done?" she asked. His smile flickered. He hadn't expected that. "Because I'm trying to buy something," she continued and turned back to the salesperson, whose expression had become the carefully neutral face of a professional managing something deeply uncomfortable. "The gold one," Lena said. "Can I see it under the light?" Eric stared at her back. He could feel it. Then he said louder now, louder than before, "You know what I heard? Someone told me you were living in some apartment complex outside the city. Alone." He paused. "I'm not surprised." The store had gone fully quiet. Whatever ambient noise there had been, soft music, the hum of the ventilation system, the shuffle of other shoppers, it had all retreated to the background. Lena kept her eyes on the pendant. It was small and gold, a simple oval with a delicate flower etched into its surface. Her grandmother would love it. "Are you going to respond?" Eric said, "or are you just going to stand there like?" The doors of the store opened. The sound reached them first. Not loud, but deliberate. The kind of sound that comes when more than two people are moving through a space together with purpose. The soft percussion of organized footsteps. 4 men in dark security uniforms entered through the main doors and positioned themselves without drama. 2 near the entrance, 2 inside. Behind them came a woman in a sharp charcoal blazer, a tablet in her hands, moving with the efficiency of someone whose job was to be 3 steps ahead of someone else. And behind her, Daniel Harlow walked into the store. He was dressed the way he always dressed when he wasn't in a meeting. Dark trousers, a simple navy jacket, no tie. He didn't look powerful in the way people perform power. He looked settled. Certain. The kind of man who has nothing to prove because the proof already existed in the ground beneath his feet. He had dark eyes that moved through the room once, quickly absorbing it. They landed on Lena. He walked toward her. The store manager, a woman in her 50s who had been watching the entire scene from behind the secondary counter, broke into motion immediately. She crossed the floor in heels that clicked twice as fast as usual, and positioned herself slightly behind Daniel's right shoulder. Her posture transformed into something formal and slightly anxious. "Mr. Harlow," she said, "we weren't expecting. I apologize, the south entrance should have." "It's fine, Michelle." He didn't look at her when he said it. Not dismissively, just because his eyes were on Lena. "Give me a moment." He reached Lena and stood beside her at the glass case. Close enough that his arm brushed hers slightly, naturally, the way people stand when they belong next to each other. "Hey," he said. Only to her. Low enough that it wasn't a performance. "Hey," she said back. "Your grandmother okay?" "She's good. I was going to get her this." She gestured to the pendant. He looked at it. "She'll love it." Then, and only then, he turned to face the rest of the room with that same settled, patient expression. His eyes moved to the small cluster of people near the center of the store. To Eric, standing 2 meters away with his $11,000 watch and his jaw very slightly unhinged. The store manager spoke again, addressing the room generally. "Mr. Harlow, I should mention, Harlow Enterprises holds the property agreement for this entire complex. Mr. Harlow's family built this mall." She didn't say it to be dramatic. She said it because she suddenly needed everyone in the room to understand who they were looking at. Eric's colleague heard it first. His expression changed in a way that was almost comical, eyes widening, the slow, horrible math of the situation being calculated in real time. The woman in the red dress put her phone completely away. She had the particular stillness of someone who has just realized they're in the wrong room. Eric stood perfectly still. Daniel glanced at him once, briefly, assessingly, then back to Lena. "Everything all right here?" Lena considered the question. The honest answer was yes. The fuller answer was more complicated. She looked at Daniel's face, steady and real and completely on her side, and said, "It is now." He nodded. Then he turned to face Eric fully. Eric found his voice. It was smaller than it had been 10 minutes ago. "I'm sorry, who are you?" He asked it the way people ask questions they've already started to dread the answer to. His chin was still up. Old habits. Daniel looked at him with the patience of a man who had absolutely nothing to lose in this moment. Daniel Harlow, he said. Simple. Clean. No performance. Then he placed his hand on Lena's back, gently, naturally, and said the 7 words that turned the atmosphere in that store into something none of them would forget. Lena is my wife. The silence that followed was total. It lasted maybe for seconds. But those 4 seconds had a texture. A weight. Like the moment after lightning when the whole world holds its breath waiting for the thunder. Eric's face moved through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, recalculation, dawning horror, and then something that looked almost like physical pain. His eyes went from Daniel to Lena and back again, and the story he had been telling himself, the comfortable, self-serving story about the poor girl he had once wasted time on, collapsed completely. Because Daniel Harlow was not a name you didn't know. Not in this city. Not in this country, in any room that had ever discussed business, technology, or money. His father had been on the cover of 3 national magazines. Daniel himself had been photographed twice at congressional technology briefings. The Harlow building downtown was 42 floors and had his family's name on it in letters 3 feet tall. And this woman, this plain, simple woman standing in the gray coat with the second-hand tote bag, had gone home to him every night for 2 years. Eric's colleague took a small, instinctive step backward. The woman in the red dress had gone the color of old ash. Eric opened his mouth. Nothing came out immediately. Then, I wasn't, he gestured vaguely. I didn't know. No, Daniel agreed pleasantly. You didn't. We were. Eric looked at Lena. Something in his expression changed. Not remorse exactly, but the first cousin of it. The shock of seeing something clearly for the first time. We dated. Years ago. I had no idea that she what? Daniel asked. His tone had not changed. Still even. Still patient. But there was something underneath it now, a quiet current, that made the store manager take one very subtle step to the left. Eric had no answer for that. Because the thing he had assumed about Lena, the thing that had made him feel safe enough to mock her in public, hadn't actually been her. It had been his story about her. And that story had just been demolished in 7 words. The store manager cleared her throat softly. Mr. Harlow, I want to apologize on behalf of the staff here. We should have. There's nothing your staff did wrong, Daniel said, and he meant it. He was looking at Eric now. Calmly. The way a person looks at something they've already decided how to handle. He turned to the 2 security guards and said very quietly, would you escort these guests out of the building? They're done here. Eric moved without resistance. That was the worst part, for him. There was no dramatic exit, no defiant last word. He simply walked. His colleagues fell in behind him without making eye contact. The woman in the red dress moved in heels that seemed suddenly very loud. At the door of the store, Eric stopped. He turned back. Lena was looking at him. She had turned from the jewelry case. She didn't look angry. She didn't look victorious. She looked settled. The same way Daniel looked. Like 2 people who were standing on solid ground. Eric's mouth opened once. Then he said, Lena. I'm sorry. He meant it. That was the tragedy of it. He finally, genuinely meant it, and it was exactly too late and exactly too small, and they both knew it. Lena looked at him for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was unhurried. Thank you, Eric. His brow pulled together. For what? For showing me exactly what I didn't want, she said. It made everything after a lot clearer. He stared at her. There was nothing he could say to that. It wasn't cruel. It was just true in the particular devastating way that truth sometimes is. The security guard placed a gentle hand near Eric's shoulder. Not touching. Just indicating. Eric Dalton left the store. The doors closed behind him. The store held its breath for one more moment. Then the store manager exhaled and said, Mrs. Harlow, I am so sorry for what happened here. Please, the pendant, please allow us to. I'll pay for it, Lena said. But thank you. Daniel looked at her sideways with something close to a smile. She looked back. Don't. I didn't say anything. You were going to. I was going to say I'm proud of you. He said it quietly just for her. The salesperson who had been standing at the counter through all of this with the composed, professional expression of someone earning every cent of their salary, gently held up the pendant. "Shall I wrap it?" "Please," Lena said. They walked out of the jewelry store 8 minutes later, Lena with a small wrapped box in her hand and Daniel beside her. And the moment they stepped into the main corridor of the mall, something shifted. People had gathered. Not a crowd exactly, but enough. Shoppers who had heard the raised voice 20 minutes ago. Staff members who had been near the store entrance. A few people with their phones angled downward in that casual way that was never actually casual. They looked at Lena the way people look at someone they have already decided a story about, and are now revising. Rapidly. She walked through them with her chin level and her pace unhurried. She had done nothing dramatic today. She had not announced herself, not played a card, not engineered a moment. She had stood in a store and tried to buy a pendant for her grandmother and waited for the truth to arrive in its own time. That was all. But she felt with each step the particular satisfaction of a woman who had never needed to be rescued, who had built her own life from scratch with her own hands, and who had simply allowed the world to catch up. Daniel walked beside her, matching her pace without comment. That was one of the things she had learned to love most about him. He never needed to make a moment bigger than it was. They reached the escalator and stepped onto it, and as it carried them downward, Lena glanced back up at the second-floor corridor. Eric was there. He had been escorted out of the main entrance, but somehow, maybe through a side door, maybe because old instincts die hard, he was standing at the second-floor railing looking down at them. He was alone. His colleagues were gone. His girlfriend was gone. He stood there with his hands on the railing and his expensive watch catching the light, and he watched Lena Carter Harlow ride the escalator down with the quiet, devastating grace of someone who had already survived the hardest version of her life. Their eyes met for 1 second. She held his gaze. No coldness. No triumph. Just the calm, clear expression of a woman who had already moved on years ago. Then the escalator carried her below the sight line and he disappeared from view. Daniel glanced at her. He had noticed. "You all right?" "More than," she said. At the ground floor exit, the automatic doors slid open and the afternoon air moved over them, cool and unhurried. And Lena stepped out of the building into a city that looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago but felt somehow different. Or maybe she was the one who felt different. More settled. More certain of something she had always known but had never quite needed to prove. She took a breath. She held the small wrapped box in her hands, the pendant for her grandmother, and she thought about the woman who had braided her hair every Sunday morning and taught her that the world owed you nothing, and that was not a sentence about despair. It was a sentence about freedom. Daniel's hand found hers. She laced her fingers through his without looking up. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. They walked toward the car together. Behind them, in the polished windows of the mall's entrance, their reflection moved and then disappeared. What Lena didn't know, couldn't have known yet, was that someone in that jewelry store had filmed it. Not the whole thing. Just the last part. Just Daniel saying Lena is my wife and the silence afterward and Eric's face rearranging itself around a truth he hadn't seen coming. 40 seconds of footage. No commentary. No caption except, "This is the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed in person." By the time Lena arrived at her grandmother's house that evening, the video had 400,000 views. By the time she woke up the next morning it had 3 million. And somewhere in the notifications that began flooding her phone, a phone she barely used for social media, a profile she had never really maintained, was a message. From an account she didn't recognize, a name she didn't know. But the message itself was only 4 words. "We need to talk." Lena stared at the screen for a long time. Then she set her phone face down on the table and looked at Daniel across the breakfast table. He was reading something, unhurried, coffee cup in hand, completely unaware. She thought about showing him. He almost did. Instead she picked up the phone again and read the message one more time. "We need to talk." Something at the back of her mind, that quiet, careful instinct she had learned to trust, told her that the afternoon at the mall had not been the end of anything. It had been the beginning. She just didn't know yet of what. End of part 1.